So I'm now going to call on Senator Blunt.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your indulgence. I was at a press conference talking about a mental health bill that I think General Dempsey will have some real impact on people who have left the military and looking at the community health centers as a mental health model. One question I have, I saw, General Dempsey, in your comments over the weekend, I think it was on State of the Union, that looking back, you don't know of anything you could have done differently. Was that your response?
That was my response, yes, Senator.
How about looking forward? What would you do differently, or what are we? Let's do that in two questions. One, what would you do differently if the same circumstance occurred again, and what are you doing to prepare for a different kind of response?
Two things. One is, as you know, the Accountability Review Board, the Pickering-Mullen Review Board, made 29 recommendations, and both the State Department and we have accepted and will implement all of those. Separately, Secretary Clinton and I agreed to a review of embassy security in any number of locations, the result of which will be to focus on 19 of them to try to improve their security situation. We also, internally to the Joint Staff and with the combatant commanders, worked on a white paper described as the new norm to account for the lack of host nation capability in some parts of the world. The Secretary already mentioned that some of the results of that include the augmentation of the Marine Security Guards, changing the posture level, directing combatant commanders to have additional forces on as reaction forces. So we're continuing.
Are we, with the new norm, are we repositioned in a way in this the dangerous part of the world and many areas you all have both mentioned today, to where we could respond now quicker than 7 hours? If we had the same 7-hour window, could we get somebody there?
Senator, the answer is, in many places, the answer is yes. The limiting factor in Africa are bases, frankly. We don't have a base architecture, with the exception of Djibouti on the East Coast, where we could position forces. So what that requires is earlier decision-making, collaboratively with the State Department, and I'll describe them as preemptive requests. And the earlier decision-making can be to close an embassy, as we did recently. I say we, the State Department did in the Central African Republic. It can be thinning it out, as they did in Khartoum, or it can be asking for additional security forces.
On one other area, I know at least for the first several years after 9/11, there was always an active discussion of what was going to happen on 9/11. Now, on 9/10, Zawahiri did a video where he actually talked about al-Libi, the Libyan, being killed, and how by Americans, and how they must get even. Was there, Secretary Panetta, are you aware, was there any evaluation of what that might mean and whether we should be thinking about how to respond to that threat?
My recollection is that that was all kind of part and parcel of looking at the general counterterrorism situation that we were concerned about in the region. And the issue, frankly, that was probably more preeminent the day before was what would be the impact of that video that was coming out that inflamed a lot of the situation in the area.
Well, I would have thought from the Zawahiri video that there would have been some sense that Libya could be a target. And I don't know if we have stepped back from our view that al-Qaeda was able to do things, and I'm not saying this is a total al-Qaeda operation, but clearly al-Qaeda's out there talking about a Libyan that was killed and how we needed to get even with the Americans for that. The day before all this happened, it concerns me that there appears not to have been the evaluation that I think went on pretty aggressively for the first 8 years or so after 9/11. And I hope one thing surely we're getting out of this is that there are still terrorists in the world and they still want to do us harm.
Yeah, no No question about that. And, you know, as you know, Senator, there are elements of al-Qaeda throughout that part of the world. And they represent a continuing threat in that part of the world. That's why we're doing the operations we're doing in Yemen. That's why we're doing the operations in Somalia. And frankly, that's why we're assisting the French with regards to AQIM. We do have to be vigilant about the elements of al-Qaeda, where they are, where they can be, and the kind of threat that they represent.
My last question would be, did we call on anybody else who had friendly forces in Benghazi to come to our assistance? The Turks, people we had helped in that area recently by coming to their assistance. Did we ask for any help that might have already been on the ground there?
The only military forces were the 17th February militia, and the call went to them immediately because they had been supportive of us ever since the overthrow.
There were no alternative security forces that other countries had?
None that we were aware of.
We could have called on? And if we weren't aware of them, I guess we didn't call on them. But now we had come to the aid of I think there was an attack on someone from Turkey within the previous month, and we had sent some people to that scene. I've always wondered why we didn't try to further secure the people we had there if we couldn't get people there. And you're telling me, General, that there was really nobody to call on.
I'm telling you that I wasn't aware of any, nor was the commander of Africa.
And are we evaluating whether we're going to use groups like February 17th again or not?
Absolutely.
Secretary Panetta, I want to say also that I think you've done a great job both at the CIA and here and at your other jobs. And frankly, I think you and Secretary Gates are two of the great public servants in these kinds of jobs in the history of the country. He knows I think that, and I want you to know I think that as well. I am concerned when Senator Graham asked who was in charge and there's not an answer. Somebody should have known that night that there is one focal point. Maybe it's, I guess at the end of the day, it's the president, though the president doesn't seem to be very engaged. I think that's a concern. You said, I believe, to Senator Ayotte that you thought, when did you think the attack was over?
Could I help with the answer? Who was in charge?
You could have helped when the question was asked earlier.
It was pretty tough, actually.
All right. Who was in charge?
So the responsible agent inside of a country for security until the introduction of DOD is the resident security officer who works for the ambassador in collaboration with
I think what Senator Graham was asking, though, is who was in charge of our response from here. You all can't just be talking with
but I can help with that
thought
too,
of conclusion.
No, I got that. So internal to the country, before we arrive, it's the RSO. Once we arrive, it's the combatant commander, commander of U.S. AFRICOM. And I want to assure you, had we been able to get, there's been a whole bunch of speculation about we were risk averse, we needed the country's permission to come in. If we had been able to get there with anything, we'd have gone in there under the command of the commander of U.S. Africa Command.
On the Marines that were on the plane in Rota, Spain, did those Marines eventually go to Tripoli?
They did.
And why were they taken off the plane and told to change from their uniforms to other clothes?
At the request of the host nation, relayed through the embassy.
And how much did that slow that response up?
Probably 30 minutes.
Now, I've read other places an hour and a half to 2 hours.
Well,
you think 30 minutes?
I'm saying that it would, that's my estimate. I just know that it was an occurrence.
And why did they go to Tripoli instead of Benghazi?
By the time they were arriving there was no one left in Benghazi.
When did we get the last person out of Benghazi that we brought out?
I'd have to look at the timeline.
I think it was within 12 hours we had moved all of the people there out.
And did they go to Germany?
We did move them to Ramstein.
And, a question I've had since the very start of this is why didn't somebody ask them at that time what happened before this all started, which would have solved the question about whether there was a demonstration going on or not. And I asked that question once before and so, well, only the FBI was allowed to talk to them, which made no sense to me at all and still makes no sense to me. We're talking to people who were in Algeria a few days ago. We were talking to them the next day I don't know of anybody that's really talked directly on this committee, Mr. Chairman, to people who were in Benghazi and who, within 12 hours, were somewhere where they could have been talked to ask what happened. Now, I'll go back to my original question, Secretary Panetta. When did you think that that the activity was over and under some reasonable level of control?
It was soon after the second attack, and at that point, our biggest concern, Senator, was the fact that we couldn't find the ambassador, and we were then teeing up the rescue team to get ready to go in because we thought we had a hostage rescue mission that we were going to have to conduct.
And the second attack was the attack that was over around midnight?
At the annex, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.